Hi chess fans, welcome to Tactics Explained. Let's have a look at this position here, white to move and win. Okay, as always we want to check checks first, and white has rook e8 check, and if king g7, bishop to d4 attacks both the queen and the king and wins the queen in the game. So we already have one motive here, which is this double attack. The other only option is bishop takes, and after queen takes check, king g7 only move. White has two options, bishop f8 and queen f8 check. Now, if you are faced with calculating this variation, I'm first going to give you the correct variation. Queen f8 check, king f6, and now a nice motive, bishop d4, attacking the king and the queen. The queen has to take, but loses coordination with the rook. The rook was protecting the queen on b2 and is not protecting the queen anymore now on d4. And after queen h8 check, we have this motive that the queen has an X-ray attack on the black queen, and black would love to protect the queen with the king, but it's not possible because of the diagonal. And after king e7, queen takes d4, white is winning the game. But what about the variation bishop f8? It's another option, and it seems like after king f6, it might be difficult to calculate because there's a check here, there's a check here, there's a check here, there's even the check going with the bishop again. So how do you calculate something like this? Bishop f8 is the wrong move here, and you would love to find a way to eliminate that variation quickly. And how can you do that? And here's a technique, and this is the key learning in this position. If you're attacking with queen and a dark squared bishop, or a bishop, it's a good idea to think about if the king has an escape square or an escape route on squares that are of the opposite color than your bishop, then very often this is a shortcut to stop calculating and recognizing that this variation is not good. So let's illustrate. White could give a check here, white could give a check here, white could give a check here. What do all those checks have in common? Well, they do have in common that, for example, after queen e7 check, the king is able to get to a light square, which is of the opposite color of the bishop, and you can see here that the bishop cannot give a check as long as the king is on the light squares, and the queen has trouble already giving a check as well because black actually controls a number of the light squares. So after queen d7 check, king e4, the king stays on the light squares, escaping checks from the bishop. For example, after king g4 check, black wins the pawn, and again, black just stays on the light squares. So if after bishop f8, check, king f6, you have so many checks to calculate, it's a good shortcut to see that this variation is not good if the king can find an escape route on the squares that are of the opposite color of the bishop. Okay, with that, let's move to the next position. Again, white to move. Pause your video to find the best move. Okay, so what's happening here? White is attacking the black queen on b4 with the pawn on e3, and black is also attacking the white king, so both queens. So both queens are attacked, but it's white to move. And of course, if white would now take the queen, black would simply take the queen as well. So in this position, the best move is bishop takes f7 check. And why is that? Well, the king is attacked, and let's have a look at if the king would take the bishop. Well, then we can give a check with the queen, and this check moves the queen out of the attack by the knight, and so the king has to move, and if the king moves away, we win the queen, and black cannot take our queen in return because the queen was able to move away with a check. So of course in this position here the king can also move to the side, but then we have bishop takes g7 check, and now the black king has to take one of the bishops. If king takes bishop f7, we have the same motive, and if king takes bishop on g7, we have a similar motive here. The queen gives a check, and again the queen was able to escape, and we are still attacking the black king. So the key learning really in this position is that if you are in a situation where both queens are attacked, look for a way to move your queen away with a check, because if you can do that, you can even sacrifice some material because you will be able to win the opponent's queen. Okay, let's move to the next position, position number 3 in this video. Again, white to move. Let's have a look what's going on in this position. Okay, one candidate move you should always look at is checks. And white can give a check here on the king. And if the king moves away, we have won a knight. So king takes, and then it's also very obvious to look at the candidate move. Again, a check, knight e6 is even a double check. So it makes very much sense to consider this variation as a candidate variation. And then in this position here, with this check, the king can only move, has only 3 options to move. And again, in this position here, it's very easy to exclude those 2 moves because king f8 is simply mate. We can exclude that. And king e8 is mate in 2, so we can also exclude that. So again, king f6 is forced, so probably we would very easily calculate until that point as well. And now we are to look at this variation here when we calculate that line in our head. And now let's have a look. This pawn is protecting this square. The queen is on that diagonal and is making sure of those squares here, is protecting those squares here. We will look at knight checks first as candidate moves because we look at checks. And we have a knight check here and a knight check here. And we also see that these pawns here are also protecting squares. So this is what we call a mating net. And what we want to focus on now in this video, or in this position, is given that mating net, how to continue. We have both knight to d7 and we have knight to g4, but if we calculate that variation in our head, it's very hard to calculate really all the variations to the end, and we would end up probably having to make a move based on intuition. So, and that's what we're going to focus here. What do you think? Is it better to move knight to d7 check or knight to g4 check? Because it will be hard for you to actually calculate these moves. So you should apply some principle. So what move do you think is better? Okay, we're going to look at both moves first. Let's have a look at knight d7 first. So knight d7 does contribute to the mating net because the knight is attacking the king with a check, so we are continuing on a forced variation, and it is protecting this square here. And so we are moving forward with a mating net. And it also looks like wherever the king moves, I'm going to move this away for a moment, wherever the king moves, the queen is ready to jump in with a check. So there is the mating net going on, and wherever the king moves, the queen can come with a check. So that looks good. But if the king moves to g5, and now queen d5 check, it turns out that after king h6, queen e6, black has g6, and it's unclear a little bit how white would continue here, because white would maybe give another check, but then the king cannot get another check by the knight, and the best that white can do is to have this eternal check here, because whenever white does not check, black is ready to attack the white king as well. So, so let's compare again. In this position here, what happens if we play knight g5? Let's have a look at the same variation. If king g5, queen check, we see now that the knight on g4 is performing two functions. It is performing the function of protecting the f6 square, which the knight was also doing from here, but it is also performing the function of protecting the h6 square. So in fact, the knight on this position here performs more functions than the knight on this position here. Okay, so in this position, king g6, queen e6, king g5, h4 is soon mate. So if you calculate that variation, and I mean, let's imagine you have this position on the board. In your mind, you will be able to calculate this check. You will be able to see this double check. You will see that the king cannot move on the back rank. So you can see that there's this forcing line, and you will maybe also see this mating net. But it turns out knight d7 does not work so well, and knight g4 works. And here's the rule of thumb that you can apply. When two equal choices exist, equal in the way that there's a mating net and there's a check that the knight gives, choose the option that brings your pieces closer to the king. So if this is the mating net here, the king will move in this area here somehow, and if you have to make that move on intuition, you should bring your piece where it's closer to the king. And we can see that here it performs two functions. As we have seen, it performs two functions of protecting both the f6 and the h6 square. Okay, so let's move on to the next position. White to move and win. What's going on in this position? Okay, I'm going to show you the correct moves. White in this position has knight f6 and knight f5 check, and the point is that black cannot take here because white has queen f6 check, king h5 forced, queen takes f5 check forced, king h6 forced, queen f6, king h5, g4 mate. So all of this was forced. So because of that, black cannot take, and black has the option of playing king h5, but after g4, king g5, queen e3 is mate. Or black alternatively can play king g5, but then queen e3 is still very strong. We're attacking on the dark squares, and if the king now takes the knight, we have g4 mate, and if the king moves back, we have g4 mate. Okay, so all of these are forced lines and you can calculate it, but the point that I want to make here is that, and this is the key learning in this position that I want to bring across in this video, if you have a position like this, you should always check, you should always evaluate checks as candidate moves. So you will evaluate this move as a candidate move simply because it gives check. And now it looks pretty stupid at first because black can take, right? But if you see, so if black takes here, I would call it an obvious reply, okay? So whenever you make a move and your opponent has an obvious reply, it's very useful to see, can I do something? Do I have a tactical opportunity if my opponent makes the obvious move? So this is just an example here. We make a move and the opponent has the obvious g takes f. But you can imagine, you can apply this principle in many other positions. Maybe not positions with a mating attack, but simply middle game positions. So in many Grandmaster games, you see that an opponent makes a move, and a player makes a move, and the opponent has an obvious move, but it turns out that this obvious move is not possible because of some tactical resource. And what you can learn from this position is that if you have this move check and the obvious move is take, and then you calculate a bit and you realize, oh my god, this obvious reply is not possible because there's this forced sequence and mate, then you know you're onto something. Okay, so check moves, and if you kind of see an obvious move does not work, you still have to calculate what happens after king g5, you still have to calculate what happens after king h5, and in this particular case you will find out, okay, it's a mate as well. But if you're in a game and you see an obvious move doesn't work, then you know you're onto something and you should start calculating, because potentially there's an opportunity for you to win the game. Okay, with that, let's move on to the last position in this video. In this video, white to move and win. Let's have a look and see if you can find the best move. Okay, I'm going to give you the answer here. The winning move is rook takes knight on f5, and the point is that if queen takes, black wants to retake the queen obviously, and then white has the resource, rook e8, check. The bishop can still go in between, and this bishop can still go in between, but this is mate because the knight is controlling this square and this pawn is pinned. Okay, so because of that, black has to retake with the pawn. Okay, so what have we done? We have sacrificed an exchange, and what we got for that is that black had to retake with the pawn. Okay, so what? Well, again, I'm going to give you the correct move here, and then we see, okay, what can we learn from this position? The correct move is queen g7, and the motive is that white is deflecting the queen. Black either loses material or takes the queen. But now the queen is deflected, and white now has rook e1 check, the similar motive as before. Queen e5, rook takes, and then similar to before, mate. Okay, so if you got those motives right, there was the motive with the pin. This pawn here is pinned. There was the motive to deflect the queen. We cannot move rook e1 check here because the queen would be able to take this rook. So queen takes, deflects the queen, and allows us to bring in this rook. So that's obviously something that you might have learned in this video. But more importantly, if you are in a position like this, white to move, somehow we know that we have a lot of pieces attacking the king, okay? All of these pieces are attacking the king. There's like strong weaknesses on the dark squares. But black also has a number of pieces defending those weaknesses, okay? So, a good, and this is also defender here, a good way and a principle to look for is, how can I bring more pieces into the attack, and how can I eliminate defenders? And that is the motive here. That's the key learning that you can take away from this video, or from this position, because by taking this knight, I'm eliminating an important defender. This knight was protecting some important squares around the king here. The knight was also protecting this bishop. So I'm giving up an exchange which is relatively little material, but I'm giving up some material for the opportunity that after queen takes, and then queen takes, and then pawn takes, or, which is a bit more resilient, pawn takes, I'm giving up some material to eliminate an important defender, and B, create the opportunity to bring in an additional piece. And in this position here, White has 4 attackers and black has 4 defenders. Or black actually has 5 defenders. So by taking a piece that's not maybe a super active attacker right now, sacrificing it for a defender, suddenly I have 4 attackers against 4 defenders. So by sacrificing some material, I have equalized the number of defenders and attackers. Plus I have now a situation where my rook here is better than this rook here. Simply when it comes to attack, this rook will be able to be a powerful participant in the attack, whereas this rook, it's unclear how this rook can come to the defense. And this is a sort of disbalance that you create in this position by taking the knight and sacrificing your exchange here. So that is a very important motive in attack. Look out if you can sacrifice material to eliminate an important defender and create opportunities to bring more of your pieces into the attack. Because after pawn takes, we can then suddenly other motives are in the position. But in essence, it's about the fact that now there are many more attackers than defenders, and as a result, we have tactical opportunities that in this case lead to mate. Okay, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you learned a lot, not only solving some tactical exercises, but actually also learning some calculation techniques and things that are more generally applicable to your calculations and your chess in general. If you did like this movie, please click the subscribe button so that YouTube will send you an update once new videos become available. Thanks a lot for watching.